It's time for structured logging. We are done with the generic response handler also. So now it's time for structured logging. So we'll try to implement the logging by Serilogger. This is one of the most standard package we generally use to perform the logging. So let's go to the manage NuGet package. We'll have to install few NuGet packages for Serilogger. So inside the manage NuGet package, let's try to install this package that is called serilogger.aspnet core. So let's try to search in the browser, in the browse, and you can find serilogger.aspnet core. So let's try to install this package. Let's click on apply. As you can see, it's finished. I think this package has been installed. We'll see whether it's installed or not. I think it's still not installed. It's taking too much time. Yeah, as you can see, the package is installed now. Now, next package is serilogger.sync.file. So let's search here serilogger.sync.file and let's install this package also. And you can see it's also finished. So this package is also getting installed. And now let's install the Serilogger enrichers.environment. So let's browse this and let's install this package also. Let's click apply. And now this is also finished. So I think this is also installed. As you can see, the install and update button. And the last package is the enrichers.thread. The serilogger.enrichers.thread. And now let's try to install again. And now click on apply. It's finished. I think this is also installed successfully. Let's wait. As you can see, the uninstall and update button. So let's go to the install section where you can find all the Seriloger's NuGet packages which we have installed recently. Apart from the packages which we have installed for achieving the CRUD operation on entity framework core. So these are the three packages which we have installed for now. And now it's time to let's go to the middleware folder. If we have middleware folder, no, then we'll have to create it. Okay, so we don't have middleware folder, so let's create the folder that is called middleware. Inside the middlewares, okay, we'll keep the folder as of now. Okay, and we'll just add two files inside the middleware that is called exception middleware. Let's create a normal class file initially, and later we'll add a code there. It's an exception middleware. Second is request login middleware. So let's click on add, right click on add file, exception logging middleware. So these two classes we have created. Now it's time to go to the program.cs to add the configuration for Serilogger. So after the add controllers or above the add controller, we'll try to add the configuration of Serilogger. That is, let's say add a configuration logger. Then log dot, okay. I think we'll have to import the namespace that is using Serilogger. Okay, now we can access the class that is called log. So log dot logger equals to new logger configuration. So logger configuration we got. Now let's click enter dot enrich dot from log context. Then click enter dot enrich dot with thread. Enrich dot with thread ID. Now enrich dot with machine name. Dot with machine name. Again dot write to console. Write to console. Then dot write to file. So inside the file, let's add a path. So I will just copy this path I have from the notepad. So this is the path where I would like to copy the logging information. So we are generally logging this information to text file, and later on we'll log this information to Serilogger. Dot create logger. Now as you can see, the error is gone. Okay. So as you can see, we are logging timestamp, label, message properties, new lines, and exceptions. Okay. So after adding this, we'll have to add the middleware also. So below the app, so let's add the middleware that is called app.use middleware. App, sorry, app.use middleware. And we have to pass that is called request logging middleware, the class which we have created. We haven't added any code yet, but we'll going to add the code there. We'll just add the middleware there. Okay, as of now, we'll just register the middleware in the request pipeline. Next is exception middleware, exception handler middleware, or exception middleware. Yeah. So let's add this middleware also. Okay, now we have added this to middleware. Okay, now it's time to go to the request login middleware to add the code. So let's create a request delegate that is private read only request delegate and underscore next. Then public, just create a controller that is called request login middleware. Copy this, paste here, and inside that middleware, register the request delegate object. Next, and assign this next object to the read-only variable. Okay. Next is create an invoke method. Public async task invoke method. So inside that invoke method, it is accepting one parameter that is called HTTP context. And now let's give the variable name that is called context. Now let's add a stopwatch, and inside the stopwatch we can add the log information. Okay, the incoming request. Okay, now we'll try to resolve the errors. Okay, in the request we are getting the, that is why we are getting the errors in request. Okay, so we'll have to read the request from context. Okay, so it should be var request equals to context dot request. So request object is having the data of each request. Okay. Now we are getting error. We'll see what is the error. HTTP context does not contain definition of request. Why we are getting this error? So you can see we are having an error. HTTP context does not having a request. They are saying, okay, let's try to figure it out this issue. HTTP content, HTTP context. I think we made some small mistake. Instead of HTTP context, we written the HTTP content, and that's why we have, we are getting the error. Now, okay, so the error is resolved now. Okay, so let's we use the await method, await underscore next, and next we have to pass the context. So if you know the underscore next method we have already created as a read-only variable, let's remove the unnecessary spaces and let's make the code clean. Okay, so for every request and every response we are logging the we are logging all the requests and responses. So now let's again log dot information. In the log dot information, first is incoming request, second is outgoing response. We are logging both. So we are done with the request middleware code. Now you can see there is no issue found. Okay, now it's trying to go with the exception middleware. Let's try to go with the exception middleware. Okay, and let's create again a request delegate object. Let's copy the previous object here. Let's paste it here. Now let's create a controller, public exception middleware controller. And now let's copy the same instance creation logic here also. So let's copy the same instance creation logic here also. Now this is done. Now let's again create a public task, public async task invoke method. Okay, inside that we'll have to write a logic for handling the exceptions. So let's try to add a try catch block, and inside the try catch block, if there is no error, then we can call the next middleware. Okay, by passing the context. And if there is an error, okay, why we are getting the error? Context spelling was the spelling mistake was there. Now in the catch block, let's accept the exception ex, and in the exception ex, let's add a await handle exception. Let's create a generic class handle exception where we can pass the we will pass the context and exception. Okay, and we can provide the implementation in the separate method for handling exception. Now again, let's create task private static task handle exception. Why we have created the static method? Because we are not going to call this method by creating the instance. We are calling this method directly. That's why we have created the static class. Okay, this is the real-time interview question have been asked when to use static class. So let's pass the http context, and http context, that is context, and second is exception ex. So if you remember, or if you know, we are passing these two parameters, so we'll have to accept it as a signature. Okay, so in the structured login, so we'll add log.error, okay, where you can find the proper error message. Okay, and if you know previously what method we are using, we are using the log.information, because we are logging all the information regarding the incoming request and outgoing response. But in the exception middleware, we have to use error methods. Okay, so this will log the error. Okay, now let's create the a response helper. So we'll have to return the response also. So as you can see, the response helper we have already created. Okay, where you can find the internal API server, and we'll have to import the API. Okay, let's try to resolve the error. We'll have to return the response also, so that's why we have created the response helper dot fail. Okay, string, and we can try to add a normal message also. We'll see. In fail, it's false message and default an error. Okay, we'll try to resolve the error later. We'll try to add the rest of the code, that is context dot response dot content type, and it should be application/json. Okay, second is a response type with we'll have to pass the status code also. So context dot response dot status code. So we'll have to parse it. So HTTP status code, HTTP status code dot internal server error. So we'll have to import the namespace, then internal server error. So as you can, the error is also gone. Now let's create a response, that is where JSON equals to JSON serializer, JSON serializer dot serialize. As you can see, we are not getting the serialize method. So I think we have chosen the wrong JSON serializer. So let's select one more time JSON serializer. Why we are getting the JSON serializer dot serialize? Still not getting. I think we'll have to import the namespace. I think system.text.json I think we'll have to use. So Newtons, instead of Newtons of JSON, we'll have to use system.text.json. System.next is already there. Now let's try JSON serializer dot serialize. As you can see, we have received the method. Now we'll have to pass the response here. Okay, the response object which we are generating here, that object we have to pass. And now again, we'll have to return context dot response dot write async. In the write async, we'll have to pass the JSON. Okay, simple. Now it's time to resolve the error. look, now let's check the what kind of error we have. That is, let's close this also. What is the, I think, type of name is API error. Okay, I think we haven't created the API error class, so it's time to create the API error class in the responses. So we have created the, API response helper. So let's create the API error class also. So in the API error class, let's create a public string, that is field. Let's create a getter setter method. Now next is public string, that is error message, getter setter method. And let's try to use this class here. And still error, we'll see, cannot collect. Still we're having an error. We'll see what wrong is happening here. List of API error. Okay, I think there is a namespace. There is a namespace issue. Let's check. The error itself stays like we'll have to make some changes into the response helper and API responses, because this is what we are returning the list of string error, but it should be API responses, I believe. So let's try API error. In the errors, okay, if we have, it should be errors. Okay, now what next changes? I think we have to make some changes into the response helper also. So in the response helper, we have to make error equals to null, and in the list of string, let's say we have to use API error here also. So now as you can see, we still have error. We still have error. We'll see API responses fail. Stream message, list of error null, false message default in errors. What error is saying? Cannot convert generic list API error to generic list of string. Okay. Okay. In the API responses, list of string, no, list of API errors. Here also we'll have to make API error. Okay. Now let's go to the exception middleware. As you can see, we don't have any errors. Okay. So now it's time to build the application and check whether everything is working as expected or not. Our application should be up and running, and then we'll run the application. We'll run the Swagger endpoint, and we'll try to execute the endpoint to see whether logging is actually working or not. So it will take some time to build the application. Now as you can see, our Swagger endpoint is up and running, and let's try to execute the get endpoint and post endpoint, and we'll check whether logging is actually happening in the text file or not. So one endpoint we have executed recently, that is get endpoint, and see the response we have received successfully. And let's try to execute the post endpoint also. Let's create a new product that is called keyboard, and let's give the price that is called 2000. And let's try to execute the post endpoint also. As you can see, the product is created successfully, and now the expectation should be log file and folder should be created into the solution level. So let's try to check. So this is the solution, and let's stop the solution, and let's see, like we have logs is created, logs folder is created in the solution level, and log.txt also created. As you can see, the get endpoint is execute, then request for post. So it is logging all the information of get and post endpoint. So as you can see, so this is the structured login where we can mention the machine name also. So from which machine the logging or the request is happened on this particular endpoint. So this is how the structured logging works. Now, there is one challenge like we have implemented exception middleware also, and we have added the logging in the exception middleware. But we'll have to check whether the exception middleware is actually working or not, and actually it is logging the exception or not. So, how we can check? Okay, this is the question actually has been asked in the interview. So, let's try to create an endpoint that is called public action result and test exception. Okay, inside the text exception, we'll simply throw the exception. Okay, we are not going to do anything. We simply throw the exception. Okay, and exception is like this is test exception for logging. Okay, and let's give the endpoint verb that is called HTTP get. Inside the HTTP get, let's give the name that is called test exception. Okay. Okay, I will show you the log file again. So see, this is the logging of incoming and outgoing request only. Okay, there is no logging for exception. Let's close the log file and let's run the application again. So you can find we have the errors. Response handler does not contain definition of S. I think we made some mistake. So let's go to the file. Okay, so it's not required. Let's delete it and let's run it once again. It will take some time to load the application or load the Swagger. And the Swagger page is up and running. I will show you the Swagger window. So as you can see, the Swagger page is up and running where we are expecting the endpoint that is called test exception. So let's try to execute this endpoint. So I have executed it. Okay. So as you can see, our code breaks the application. So as you can see in the Visual Studio code or Visual Studio application, it in Visual Studio solution, it breaks the application. Okay. So now let's run, continue the, solution. And now you can see, you can find the internal server error we have received. So as you can see, we have received the internal server error. Okay. Now it's time to see whether it actually logs the exception or not. Now let's go to the Visual Studio again. Let's stop the application or solution which is running and let's open the logs folder where you can find the proper or detailed or structured exception login has also happened from the machine name that is called Nikhil. Okay, machine name is Nikhil and this is the endpoint also on which endpoint the exception was thrown, line number also, everything was mentioned here. So this is how the structured logging works.